Recently, I got a lot of questions about what colors I use to create Alpenglow watercolor paintings, so I thought it'd be fun to make a little video where we get to explore some of these beautiful colors together and create some relaxing color swatches and mixtures along the way. And these are the same basic colors that I use in a bunch of different scenes, from super vibrant, layered mountain landscapes to more zoomed in on glaciers, or looking at a peak from farther away, or even peaks that are illuminated in the clouds going into the distance. So without further ado, let's start exploring some colors. And for these Alpenglow paintings, I really try to keep myself to a simple, limited palette. The yellow that I use the most is this one here. This is Hansa Yellow Medium. It has been a perennial long-term favorite for really any orangey, interesting Alpenglow landscape, because it can make colors from this very bright, crazy yellow all the way down to gentle, tiny, delicate washes of color. The next one is quinacridone Rose. This is a really stunning pigment that I've had in my palette since I think I first started working with Daniel Smith pigments well over 10 years ago now. It's so vibrant. And what's so fun about Alpenglow paintings is that we actually get to use this color, maybe not at this 100% saturation you see here, but not far off, which is somewhat rare for my painting landscapes. Next up is Indian Red. This is a color that I honestly don't use a ton day to day when I'm working on plein air paintings outside, but I've found over the years that in an Alpenglow scene, when combined with these two colors and even some of the blue that you'll see next, this one really does help just tone down the colors a little bit, or is really useful for these bottom colors down here when we're switching from the fully illuminated rock into these more subtle tones in the more shadowed area of a painting. Then of course, cobalt blue. It's one of my absolute favorite colors. I use it so much in so many of my paintings in the Northwest, whether I'm painting Alpenglow or daytime scenes. It's just really versatile, has a tiny bit of granulation, that sandy texture, and I find it to be so forgiving when I'm working on many different landscapes. Then last up is this really beautiful dark gray. This is going to be our neutral tint color. All these pigments are from Daniel Smith. It's the brand I started with many years ago, and I've just stuck with it. One reason I stick with it is that they're very accessible for most of my students to be able to find all around the world. And just to give you a little preview, this is where we're headed with our color swatch fun time today. And I'm extra excited to be playing with some Alpenglow color mixtures, because starting in November of this year, I'll be doing a 3-part Alpenglow class where I'll be really showing you how to take all these different color mixtures and combine them into a finished and full painting. So this is my fun little way to start getting ready for that class. And I'm just so excited to paint with you with our little swatches today. One of the reasons that Alpenglow can be so tricky to paint is that our pigments look like this, right? Coming out of our palette, they often are super vibrant and saturated, but then inside of our landscapes, oftentimes I need colors that are like this. They're way more delicate, way more washed out. So in order to get these colors to be more delicate like that, it's just a matter of adding more water to the mixture. So I'm increasing the amount of water and decreasing the amount of pigment. That's what will allow me to have a really, really nice, pale, delicate pink like the one you see here. So that is on its own one of the colors that I use a ton in Alpenglow landscapes. It's literally just a bunch of water with a little bit of quinacridone Rose. And I find that to be oftentimes on its own a very appropriate color for parts of my snow, because I can make it even more delicate and subdued if I want by adding more water and less pigment. And then by changing that ratio progressively of adding more pigment as we go along, you can see how that would then change this from lighter to darker. So as you can see, with Alpenglow, it's especially important to be keeping an eye on the ratio of water. And one of the first mixtures that I often end up doing in a painting is that I will have a little bit of my Hansa Yellow Medium, usually just about like that, very, very simple, plain yellow, nice, light and delicate in some of the areas that are most illuminated by the sun. And then I'll have fun starting to add a little bit of my pink. And this is where I just love this mixture so much, because we can get these very simple, delicate shades of orange. And as I progressively add more of that pink, that may not have been quite enough there, it will then continue to shift this color even more orange until we can actually get really surprisingly vibrant oranges with just this combination of color. And I stumbled on this one for Alpenglow many years ago, and I really haven't changed which colors I use, because this has just been such a powerful one. And right here, you can see I'm keeping my pigment to water ratio lower. So I have these are more watered down. If I now, as I go across, if I start increasing the amount of paint, so more yellow and more of my rose, then all of a sudden my orange is going to get much more saturated, much more of like that traffic cone orange. And I might even want to start shifting it into a little bit darker here with more of my rose. And this might be starting to border into the colors I would use for the rocks. So usually this range here where I have less pigment, more water is what I'm using for the snow. And as I start to get into this higher concentration of my paint to water, that's when I'm going to start getting into the rock colors. So then we have something like this one right here. And you can see that with these two colors, we can also make this really, really stunning, vibrant, gorgeous red. So many options between just these two colors. And let's, maybe if we want for fun, we can just go back to, I think we covered the oranges, but to highlight the range of possibilities here when we're changing the ratio of our water, I think I want to, and I got my colors all mixed together over here. That's all right. That's going to happen no matter what I do. Over here, let's try just having a little bit more watered down than that. Let's water down some of our Hansa Yellow Medium as it comes across. Then I'm going to start blending that in with a little bit of my rose. And for this pass of color, I want to keep everything really, really light and delicate, thinking about maybe this would be a pass of color I'm doing in my snow, and then just letting these two different pigments blend together there in the middle. There we go. So there's an approximation of some of the colors I'd use in that very first light, delicate pass of color, again, that you see in our snow here. Then when I start moving away from the snow, and if I start wanting to look at the rocks, so these more dark hues up here and in here, that's when I'll say, okay, I want less water, and I'm going to go for way more paint and much less water, and then all of a sudden we'll have the possibility for these beautiful, crazy, vibrant colors that are way darker too. So I'll swatch that out here for us. And if you're following along with the color swatches, just do whatever feels exciting for you. You know, you don't have to be making the swatches exactly like you see me doing here. Just explore and have fun. That's always my goal with paints, is just to be having fun. I'm getting a little bit of glare there. That should be a little better for us. Much improved. So this is a little bit darker here. And then I could take this even a step further if I wanted and really then go really, really dark with my paints and try to get into this space where I have just a ton of paint on that paintbrush. So I'm using it at mass tone, which is the saturation level of the paint as it comes out of the tube. So I'll bring this color across, my Hansa Yellow Medium. It's a little bit contaminated with some rose, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about it. And then we'll bring some, not even that much water again. I want just straight up rose basically on this side to the right. And when these two mix in the middle, they will make these incredibly vibrant, super stunning orange colors that I love so much. So very rarely in an Alpenglow painting will I ever use this color right here, just a pure pink. It's a little bit crazy. I might end up using the pure yellow depending on how really vibrant those colors are. But usually this range here is somewhere where I might end up seeing those colors. And oftentimes, once I'm working on a painting, I find that, okay, you know, the Hansa Yellow Medium and Quinacridone Rose were appropriate for my snow, but this stuff here just isn't quite feeling right. So when that's the case, that's usually my clue for rocks that I need to start adding in a little bit of my Indian red. And we're staying right now, I'm focusing just primarily on the warmer colors. I haven't started shifting to the purples and the blues yet. So we're thinking just about our reds and pinks. So if I think about now wanting to start adding into this same color mixture here for my rocky colors, now I'm going to take some of my Hansa Yellow Medium, some rose, and now we can bring this Indian red to play. The Indian red will really, really want to take over and dominate that mixture and make it more brown. So we have to be mindful of not using too much of that pigment to start, because you can see just a little addition is going to make some beautiful changes in how that color appears. If I add more Indian red to this mixture without adding any extra rose or yellow, then it just looks like the brown, the Indian red. And the Indian red is named after the original origin of the pigment, which was the country of India. So the fun thing about this one is that when I want to get those really dark, rocky tones that you see in here, that's where I say, okay, I want a lot of my pink and I want a lot of my yellow. And then I usually end up going pretty heavy on the Quinacridone Rose, and then I can add in a fair bit of that Indian red. And then we start to get into the more interesting dark colors. So I'm going to use even more of my rose there. So you can see how that color, it may not show up on the screen, but this is a very interesting dark red tone. One of my favorite colors for rocks. So that just about covers, the colors that I will use with just the reds and the. So that just about covers everything I would use. Okay. And then next, and at this point, we are really only at the first stage of color mixing, because we have beyond this the even more fun possibilities that start to happen when we begin adding our cobalt blue. And with the blue, I have to be careful because this color will want to make green very, very readily with our Hansa yellow medium. And at this point, we have a lot of beautiful colors, but we don't quite have a complete picture yet of all the colors that we'll need for Alpenglow. What we are still missing are going to be the blues and purples that come from adding cobalt blue. And cobalt blue can be a challenging color to work with when we're thinking about Alpenglow, because if we take some Hansa yellow medium here, as soon as we add a tiny bit of blue to that, we're going to immediately start to get shades of green. To avoid that, I will most often have a buffer of pink between any yellow area and any blue area. And we can possibly see that the most clearly in this painting, where you see how there's yellow here, but in between all of the yellow and then the blue, there's a nice purple pink buffer. And those purple pink colors are made by making sure I have no yellow left on that brush to start. And then we'll take some of our pink here, and that pink has a little bit of, I actually need to get some more pink here. I've made such a beautiful mess on my palette already. So we'll add some more rose to the page. And for this demo, I am using the paint out of the tubes. Normally, when I'm working in the field, I would be working from my dried palette of paints here, but just for fun, I thought I'd work with the nice juicy paint right out of the tube. Okay, so back to our colors here, and we'll start with a lighter saturation and go darker just like last time. So I have a little bit of my quinacridone rose, and let's add just a little bit of our beautiful cobalt blue. So immediately that's going to bring us to this stunning, very slightly, now barely lilac purple tinted pink. I'm trying to keep things very light, imagining I'm working in those snowy colors. With the addition of a little bit more blue, we'll get into this equally gorgeous, slight purple color. And with the addition of more blue, you can see how we can get these really subtle transitions into more and more purple. And I don't use a ton of blue in the upper areas of the Alpenglow. I'm talking about areas like up here. Really, I want to have, depending on the scene and the transitions I want, the blue usually comes to play at the bottom in the shadows. So let's bring even more blue into play into this mixture. And you can see we can get a very beautiful range of purples. And then if I add some more water and go almost all the way blue here, then we end up with a lovely color about like this. That's going to be just a very delicate, slightly purplish cobalt blue. So I have so much fun with these different colors. They're some of my favorites. And these pinky purple tones here, I just choose these based on what my scene is showing me. Because sometimes an Alpenglow scene like this one really won't have much purple. It'll have more of just the yellow, a tiny pink barrier, and then the blue. And other scenes like this one had a whole bunch of stunning purple that was at play in this whole lower region. So I'm just looking at my scene and my reference, or my reference photo, for guidance on what exact color I should choose from that spectrum. And to think about these colors here again, once again, I just started with a very, very light, delicate pink. That's maybe even a little bit brighter than I would usually see in my snow. And then that transitions across to our cobalt blue. I'll make sure that's very, very light. So this is again thinking about our beautiful snow, and that can transition across, and then we'll have these stunning, delicate purple lilac colors across that whole mixture. So there are some of our interesting purples and pinks that we see in our snow. And one of the fun things about using pink and the rose here, and I can demo this over on the side down here, is that buffer idea I mentioned just a few minutes ago. So let's say that I really want to have a delicate transition from, I'll even do it over here. Maybe I want to go from a yellow to a blue. If that's the case, I'll grab a little bit of my yellow here, and it will have a little bit of pink in there, but that's okay. Maybe the top of this portion of our peak has some yellow in there. So we'll start with that yellow. Then as that yellow is going across whatever space I'm covering, I'll pretty quickly switch into some of that rose, and I'll start to have that rosy buffer. So there's that pink and the yellow are mixing together, reaching down from the most illuminated part of our Alpenglowy scene, reaching down toward the bottom portion where maybe we have our shadows start. And once we get down toward that shadowy area, I'll make sure that I'm not starting my brush strokes over here. Instead, they're starting over here in the shadowy zone and then going up into that purpley or into the pink zone, and we're not touching any of the yellow. My little swatch here wasn't quite symmetrical, so let's go ahead and make that a little bit more symmetrical here. And I can have a little bit of intersection of the yellow and the blue, but I really don't want to let them, like I can have them go next to each other like that, but I want to avoid really running my brush through that zone too much, because otherwise the more I mix with my brush, the more those pigment particles will combine and shift into that green space, which generally I'm trying to avoid in an Alpenglow painting. Not always. Sometimes there are, and I'm not always trying to avoid it, but usually I'm trying not to get too much green inside of that scene. So that's the strategy I use for the beautiful shadowy colors that shift from the yellow down to the blue. And then sometimes too, that cobalt blue will come back into play, oftentimes at a higher concentration, when I'm going back into a scene to add the shadows. So then we might end up in this space somewhere down here where we have a much darker blue that will fade out to. And when I'm adding those shadows, if I didn't put them down before the rocks, I'll literally just put down a shadow, rinse the paintbrush off, dry it off, and then use that damp semi-dry brush to carry that color across and feather the edge to make it less of a hard, jarring edge. We can see that at play in this painting, where I had some harder edges for my shadows in here, and then down here, all those shadow edges got blended and softened into the cloud layer down below. And really, these shadows are such a magical thing. I love them so much. And that's one of the things I'm most excited to talk about in the upcoming Alpenglow class, because the scene really comes to life with the tiny details of shadows or the tiny details of some of our little glacier patterns and things like that. And then next up, we also have to think about our darker rock colors. So that's going to be, we've already looked at these orangey brick red colors up here that we make with our Hansa Yellow Medium, Quinacridone Rose, and Indian Red. But then what happens when we want these colors down here, these shades over here that have more of a bluish purplish cast? And that's where, as you can anticipate, we shift into using that beautiful cobalt blue to our advantage. So just like when we were thinking about the darker colors for the snow here, now I want to use a much higher concentration of my pink, and oftentimes I'll have some Indian Red at play in here, and then I start adding in some of that lovely cobalt blue. So now we can have a color like this where it's very, very different from the colors we were working with up there. So this is like the fully illuminated rocks that are just super shiny and stunning. Now we're looking at the rocks down below that are more in shadow or in the transition zone from shadow to the really dark stuff down below. And that's where this mauve tone is super fun. And well, the fun thing about Alpenglow and shadows is that we can really play with what color we want by just pulling the lever of these different colors. So if I add more of my cobalt blue immediately right now, that's going to go into a nice deep dark purple. And then if I add more of the Indian Red, then it will go back into, oh, I'm getting my paintbrushes everywhere. Then this will go back into a slightly more brownish brick red color, which is also beautiful in its own way, just different from those two. And I hope these are showing up okay in the video. It's always hard to tell. And then, so you can imagine these colors are in that space, like right in through here. And as we start going farther down the mountain, then we're going to have just more of our cobalt blue overall. So I'll shift that mixture by adding quite a bit more blue. You'll notice that I'm adding color to this puddle mixture right here, but I'm not really adding much more water because I don't want to have this color get skewed back toward these more pale colors that we see in the little bit of snow. So I want to go even more bluish here. And I still have quite a bit of my red in there, but that's definitely going into a dark purpley blue color. And at this point, as I'm going farther and farther down the peak here, as I'm starting to go down into this zone, I might want to get away from the pink mauve tones altogether, in which case this is really where our lovely Indian Red comes to play. Well, not Indian Red. This is where I start using some of my neutral tint gray, and this is going to be then, it'll just darken these up even more. So it'll just take those beautiful mauve and brick red tones, and it can shift it into a full gray color like you see right here. Or if I want to keep it in more of a bluish tone, and I've run out of my cobalt blue in there, so we'll grab some more. And oftentimes, if I want to get away from the pinky red colors, I'll just start a completely new puddle of color because I find that the pink and the red linger in the mixtures. So I want to get away from those. I'll just start clean with some cobalt blue, then add a little bit of my neutral tint to that, And that will give me this really stunning, slightly grayish bluish color. There was still a little bit of pink in there, but that's okay. And then if I want to make that even more of my grayish tone, just add more of the neutral tint gray. That just shifts it in that other grayish direction. Or I can rinse the brush and bring even more cobalt blue into play and have mostly cobalt, which is a tiny, tiny bit of my neutral tint, which is a color I do sometimes use in my rocks. Less frequently, but I often sometimes do like to have a very bluey, slightly grayish color rock. And that would be this stuff like you see here. And just like with our snow, sometimes our rocks, we don't want them at full opacity like this. Maybe we want them to have the slight impression of some opaque, like a little bit of like lightness or just pattern showing through them. So in that case, I would think about the same mixtures. So let's say we play with some mauve to start. So that would be some of our rose, some more of our Indian red. And let's make a nice mauve tone to begin. So I'll have that over here. And if I want it, right now it's this beautiful mauvey purple color, but maybe it's looking a little bit too dark. So that's where if I'm testing out that color, I can just add some more water. And the addition of that extra water will just help thin that color down and take it out of that super opaque place and into a more semi-transparent space, which oftentimes is where a lot of the magic of watercolor happens anyway. So I try to play with that and really pay attention in a painting to whether I want fully opaque rocks or if I want my rock patterns to be in this less opaque space where more of the color blending shows through easily. And just sometimes maybe I want a higher feeling of luminosity and light in parts of the painting. So that's where I'll revert to this space. Let's play with another transition there. Let's do actually a really dark color. Let's go from an orange all the way down to a blue. So for this one over here is our kind of last little play thing here. Let's start with this, a really beautiful mid-tone rock orange color like this one right here. And as we transition this off to the right, then we might grab some of let's do some Indian red and some rose. So we can have a transition of a pinky-ish buffer. Let's shift into that color there. So there's that pink buffer I talked about. And then as we go across, we can start getting more bluish. And this is what I'm literally doing as I'm going down the page, as I'm working on those rocks. I'm like a typewriter. I start up on the top of the painting with the light, and as I go down, I'm just shifting the colors I use and letting them blend just like this, wet and wet together on this page. Or wet next to wet, maybe is even a better description because there is not a wet layer beneath them. I'm just letting these two, the wet pigments adjacent to each other, literally move across the page and have lots of fun as they transition. And then this would shift all the way into even more blue. And as you can see here, I'm having a hard time getting rid of that pinky cast. That's definitely challenging sometimes. Maybe we'll grab some lovely, more dark, less diluted cobalt over here on the right-hand side. You're running out of space, but you get the idea of how I would operate that transition for the rocky zone from a more reddish to a more bluish. And I think that covers the main mixtures I'll use for Alpenglow. I hope that was fun. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. And if you'd like to learn more about how to apply these mixtures and techniques I've mentioned here into an actual Alpenglow painting, I'm going to be leading an Alpenglow class starting here in November. And then the recordings of that will be available after if the live sessions are done. So thanks for painting with me.